Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. I am Tanya Jackson, and I am the creator of Nonprofits Get Connected and managing your back office operations so you can focus on your mission. The back office is a very important factor in managing your nonprofit organizations, especially if you're a small nonprofit and you're growing. That the back office, now is the perfect time for you to look at different options in terms of how your back office looks. So I'm going to play my intro video tonight, and I think this is the first time that I'm showing this. I'm going to put my intro video and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. So tonight, and actually, let me thank you. We have made it through the month of September. And this whole month, we've been talking about choosing your donor management software. And there's so much more that's involved in choosing this software. And I'm just really pulling out some of the really, important things that I normally, have experienced when I've been going through conversions with software or choosing a new software, things like that. Right now, I am working with OneCause. And so tomorrow I'll be doing some walkthrough and some training with that. Usually I pick up on softwares very easy. But OneCause, and I've listed it in my ebook, OneCause provides you with a donation platform or peer-to-peer or auction for virtual events, because now, since we're in a pandemic, a lot of the events have gone to a Zoom platform, some type of online platform. So you can still have your gala and you can do it on a virtual platform. And another thing is, I mentioned a while back that I have been working with Black Belt Razor's Edge for a little over 15 years now. And normally they would have a huge conference. I mean, just all kind of information and software, new upgrades, things that they're doing, classes, workshops. They like to have parties and things like that. Well, they're taking all of that online. And so I'll be attending that in October. And the most enjoyable part of it was they sent me an email. They're sending everyone out a gift box that registered. So they were asking for my email, my information, my address, where to send the box to, if I had any, was I, vegan, vegetarian. So I'm excited to see what's going to come in that box, because this is a totally free event. And normally it cost, the last time I went, it cost about $800-900. And it was in Tennessee at the Gaylord. So they really go all out with, with their events. So I'm going to share my screen. So tonight's topic is on integration and who owns your data. So this topic is, a lot of people get confused about the term integration and what that means. So I'm going to be going through talking about basically what that means. And then the last part of this session is who owns your data. So this is what I'm going to be, those are the two items I'm going to be talking about tonight. And as promised, once I end this session, I will post the ebook that I promised on choosing your data software. There's a little bit of more information in there. There's some checklists, some questions, top questions that you should ask, things like that. So hope it's beneficial to you. And then I'm always available for questions. If you've got questions, you could put it in this post, or you can email me. And let me put my email address up real quick, and I'll take it down and I'll put it back up a little later. But let's see. Okay. So that's my email address. If you want to email me a question, or there's something that you are unsure about, maybe you're thinking about going through this process, just email me. And I'll try and answer your question to the best of my knowledge. I'll refer you to a reference or things like that. So let's get started with our topic for tonight. So the first thing is data integration. What is data integration? And what I want to do is, my slides are very short tonight, because I'm really just going to put up basically what all the questions that I'm going to be answering tonight and talking about tonight. So I'm going to put up that slide, and I'm just going to, go back and forth with that. And let's see. Okay. All right. So let me share the questions that I'm going to be talking about with you. This always happens. Okay. So the first question, what is integration? So integration, plainly explained, is basically, it's a tool that allows you to connect two softwares together, where the data is shared between both software. So it's kind of, so sometimes you have isolated information, and with an integration, that information is no longer isolated. So there's a connection between the two softwares where that information can go back and forth through that software. And people tend to get it confused, because when you're talking to a software company and you ask them about integration, they will say, yeah, our software integrates with your software. And the thing is that it's a difference with integration. It's different if, like the software that I'm learning right now, that was one of my questions. And basically, sometimes they will explain integration to you as, well, yeah, you'll be able to export a file out of our system, and then you map the files, and then you can integrate it. You can put it back into your system. That's not integration, because integration should be a smooth process going from one software to the other. You should not have to export and then import data in that way, in that manner. So so basically, if you're, if they ask this question, what is integration? What is involved in integrating my software? Because like I said last week, once you begin to get a lot of data, you're gonna want to start asking about integration, because that file is going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, that you've got to move from one software to the other. So the next question, what type of software will you integrate? And what I mean by that is there's two main things that I have worked with. One is a plugin and the other is cloud-based. So the interesting part about a plugin, so a plugin means that when you go into your database, that you'll see that plugin sitting there. The plugin, most times you don't have to activate it. If it's in your system, that means it's already been plugged into your data. So most times when you open up your software system, that plugin gets to working also. So so at one point, I used to work with a software called Import-O-Matic. Import-O-Matic was a plugin inside my database. So that meant that whenever I was transferring donor information that had come in, maybe let's say through our lockbox or through another system, so that data would be sitting and waiting for me to move it over into my main database. With that plugin being in place, basically everything was already mapped. So all I had to do was upload the information and then click another button to move that data over into my database. And then once it was moved into the database, it would spread out into all the different donor records. So with the mapping put in place, and when I say mapping, I mean you've mapped the first name field to the first name field in your database. You've mapped the last name field and all of these fields have to be mapped. First name, last name, if there's a middle name, address, city, state, zip, all of those fields have to be mapped before they can be moved over into your system. If they're not mapped correctly, you'll get an error message. So that is, the plugin piece. The cloud-based, I've worked with cloud-based also, which means that cloud-based means that your data is sitting not on your server, but it's sitting in the cloud. So right now, so the Blackbaud, the system I'm working with now, it's a huge, huge system. Like I said, it's in about 4 different countries. And it used to be where it was, it's set on my server. And when it sits on your server, that means that you're owning the software and you're responsible for the data in it. When it's cloud-based, you're basically, it's just like you're logging into Facebook or you're logging into your email system. Cloud-based means that it's sitting on their server and it's sitting out, not in nowhere land, but in the cloud means you're logging into a system and that data is sitting there. That person, that company that's managing that database means that they're doing your upgrades. So when there's updates and upgrades to your system, they're doing them. When there's backups to your system, they're doing it. When there's errors in your system or breaches, things like that, they're responsible for that. So I like cloud-based because it takes the responsibility off of me and my company to manage that piece of all that compliance piece of the data. So I like cloud-based. So the next question is, which integration software do you need? And what I mean by that, so you'll hear when you're working with software companies, you'll hear sometimes they'll refer to you as API. I remember I first went to Salesforce. I went to one of their, it was their conference that they were having, but they had a huge event at McCormick Place here at our convention center, and that part of it was free. And so I went to that, and when I began to talk to the nonprofit expert there, he mentioned API quite a bit. API stands for application application programming interface, apps. Basically, that's what it is. It's apps that connect to your system that you can use, that you can load into your system. You may have experienced this in other types of software where you can load apps right into your software. That's what that is, the API, application programming interface. And so with that, when I looked at Salesforce and I looked at their nonprofit piece, basically I asked them, I said, well, what accounting for finance, because you have to reconcile your donations at the end of the month and then at the end of your fiscal year. And so I was asking about the finance piece, like how do I reconcile my donations? How do I reconcile my money that I've brought in? How do I reconcile it to finance? Well, they led me to an app store. And just like on your phone, it's an app store. And for each of these things that I wanted, I would have to load an app into that system. So if I wanted a financial product, I'd have to load that app into my database. If I wanted an email product, I'd have to load that app. Some of the apps are free. Some will cost you. You want to know that up front. How do I know which apps are free and which ones are going to cost me? You want to know that up front. So basically, then you want to know when you update, is it one way or two ways? So does that information, once you take it from one software to the other, does it only go one way? So can I only take my software, my data from this software and move it to another software? Or can I move this data back and forth? Let's say I wanted to clean my database. Am I able to move my data back and forth? Maybe I've decided this group of information, I wanted to sit on my server and not in my cloud, or vice versa. Can you move that data back and forth? So that's one of the important things you want to know. Updates. You want to know if they're doing an update, is it going to happen in both systems? Now, that's going to be important because when you're moving data back and forth, you want to know that your data is clean. So where are those updates going to happen? Are you going to work to update your system from the data that before you put it in your system, which I recommend? Or when those updates happen, if you move the data over into your database system and that update happens, make sure it's going to affect all data and not just the data that you have sitting there, but making sure that all data, everything in your system is being updated at the same time. And then the next question is, which type of data needs to be be integrated? I'm sorry. So this is basically like sitting down and thinking. When you're transferring data from one system to the other, is really about sitting down and saying, in order for my system to be fully integrated and my data to be complete, what data am I transferring over because sometimes you get huge files with a lot of columns, and some of the data is useless. Some of the columns is useless. Some of the columns you look at and you're like, I'll never use this. Well, there's no sense in transferring over into your database if you're not going to ever use it. But then think about it. If sometimes you got to think way out, like in terms of, you got to ask, am I ever going to use this? Because sometimes right now it may not be relevant to what you're doing, but you want to know if think about, am I going to, 2 years from now, a year from now, is this information going to be important to me? Now, here's the thing. You can always go back and pull in more fields, or more data from the same block of data, the same file that you, like if you don't update everything, you can still go back and pull in that one column or two columns. But what's going to happen is when in order to avoid duplicating those same constituents or donors that you're transferring in, you're going to have to know how to map it and how to tell your system, match this column up with this name. And usually it's a constituent ID. And so not the name, because you can have 5 people with the same name, but they may have different constituent IDs. So each record that you're adding into your system will have a different ID number. That's how you do your mapping. So let's say you had to go back and add more data from that particular file. You would do it by the constituent ID, or whatever they want to call the ID for that donor or that constituent. Whatever that number is, you're going to map that column to that number, and then you're going to import it. So one of the things that I always practice whenever I'm exporting data, importing data, moving data around, I always pull in the ID number, because like I said, you could have 5 people with the same name, then your system doesn't know what record that information should go to. So I always make sure that I have some type of IDing system, and you might want to ask about that also. Can I assign numbers to my donors and constituents, or does a system automatically assign these numbers, and in what order are these numbers assigned? So those are important things that you are going to want to know. Now, so that's basically the what I wanted to talk about with integration. Like I said, you can Google it, you can ask, have conversations about it, but this is something that you really want to understand how that process works when you're choosing a data software. Okay, so now I'm going to go into our next topic, which is, hold on a moment. Okay. Okay. All right. So our next topic is who owns your data. And this could be tricky, because it just depends on how your system is set up. It could be very tricky in terms of knowing this information, and sometimes it could even be between departments, like who owns the data between departments. It could be internally. It could be, you have to really think about some systems, like the system the software, the database that I'm currently working in. When I first started working with this company, it was more finance focused and not donor relations focused. And so what I had to do is I had to take a deep dive into the system, and I literally had to create 2 systems within that one system. I needed for my system to be able to talk to finance, and I also needed my system to be able to relate to the donors. So it wasn't set up that way. It was set up mostly to talk to finance. So basically, it's in terms of who's owning the data in the system, it could be a split between finance, IT, fund development, in terms of what parts of this data is important and to whom, and who has access to that data. Because you can restrict certain parts of your data. If you're allowing different departments into your database, you can restrict certain parts of the data that they're not able to see or manipulate. And you want to think that through. You want to think about those security levels, because you don't want someone from marketing or IT going in and updating donor information like name, address, and telephone number. So you may want to lock those fields out from them being able to develop it, but you do want them to be able to, like with finance, you do want them to be able to go in and run a financial report, a money related report. So you got to really sit down and think about who's owning what parts of my data and who has access to it. The first thing that you need to think about is your data public or private? And let's take, for instance, Facebook. So with Facebook, so let's say Facebook has access to your data. And so Facebook basically, their privacy issues or their privacy laws that they have to honor in terms of your data. But what happens is once you post information in Facebook, it becomes public, which means that now Facebook is they're not it's not ownership, but you've just given them the right to share your information. So when you are sharing posts and sharing data and sharing your information, you've given them the right to be able to do that. So in a database, it's basically the same thing. You know, once if your data is public, you got to make sure that you got to ask the company that, you know, like, is my data protected? Am I in compliance? My donors, I do not want to share my list. I don't want to sell my list, because some organizations do that to raise money. They'll sell your database list. So you want to make sure that the data that you're gathering is private, is kept private, and you want to make sure that your donor knows that their data is kept private and you do not share their data. So there's something called, hold on a moment. There's something called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. And basically that's governance and privacy laws that impacts who owns and how owns your data and how it can be used. So if you really look through the contract you're signing, or you know, a lot of times when you're signing these contracts, a lot of people do not read the contracts. They do not go through the detail because the process sometimes happens so quickly. You don't read that. But you want to look for GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. You want to read that and know what that is with that particular organization. So one thing that this covers is, for instance, in a database I work in, we are for compliance, we are not able to keep the entire credit card information. We are only allowed to keep the last four. The system automatically does that for us. So we don't put the credit card in and we go out and wipe out the first 12 digits. The system automatically, once that card number is in, the system automatically, you'll see dots for the first 12 numbers, and you'll only be able to see the last four digits. So a lot of times what happens with that is, let's say, for instance, somehow the credit card information got wiped out or something went wrong with it. You then have to call that donor and ask them and let them know, you know, we need your credit card information again. But sometimes what happens is, you know, donors can get leery about that, but you have to explain to them that we are not allowed, per, you know, GDPR, you know, we're not allowed to keep your full credit card number. Somehow your credit card number was, you know, erased from our system. And sometimes what I'll do with donors like that is I will ask them to call me back. Because sometimes what happens is when someone's calling you randomly saying, well, we need your credit card number, you may get leery. And so, you know, out of the blue, and they don't know who you are. They don't know where you're calling from. So a lot of times they will feel better about calling you back because now they know the number they've dialed into, and you can answer with the company information, and they feel a little bit better about that. So that's one of the things I do when I am working under this GDPR. The next question is cleaning your data. And so what I mean by cleaning your data is, let's say you're changing vendors. And when you're changing vendors, one of the things that you want to do is you don't want to dump a lot of bad data into a new database. So you come up with a way for you to clean your data before that's happened. So you want to do this well before it's time for you to do an integration or to move your or conversion. You want to do that, you know, in enough time that you have to do that. So then you got to think about what information do I have in my system that is just taking up space, that's taking up. Now, if you're cloud-based, you should have unlimited space in your database. So there should be no limitations. The only limitation you might have is once you reach a certain number of constituents. Like, let's say once you have 50,000 records, then we're going to increase your cost. So they may let you get up to, so, and then with those 50,000 records, the data limitation for those records is unlimited. And that's what you want. You want to be able to keep adding on and keep adding on. But when you're ready to convert, they're going to want to clean your data so that you're not taking over a bunch of trash that you've been building up over years and years and years, and you've meant to clean it out, haven't cleaned it out, it's no longer needed, you don't want it. You want to do that cleanup. And I think last week I mentioned to you all about when you are doing a conversion or you're moving from one software to another, you want to work in your sample database, or you don't want to work with your live data. And I mentioned that the reason for that is because fee for them to give me a copy of my sample database or my you know, a copy of the database. There's a fee for that. So you gotta put that into your cost. Ask, you know, if I ever want to convert to another software, is there going to be a fee for that? Do you do it for free? You know, you want to ask that question. And the other thing is basically cleaning your data. So that's what so basically that's probably about it. And like I said, I am still going to I will post the ebook in the on the page. And if you want the ebook emailed to you, I can also do that. And I will also be posting a copy. So the October, let's see, my October is, let's see, let me share that for you, because we're going into October and time is just really moving fast, and we're almost, you know, up to the holidays. I was just talking with my my team about you know, basically about you know, holidays are coming up, you know, what time are you taking off? Let's make sure we got that in order, because a lot of nonprofits that, you know, operate at year end, some of them close down the last week of the year, but then there are others who want to stay open because they figure they're going to get donations in, and they're going to miss that deadline. Well, I've worked in shops where, I used to be that way. I used to, shops that I worked at, they figured, someone has to be here because if a check come in or things like that, then, someone has to make the deposit. And so they had the fund development team working. Well, things have changed now. And so basically when year end comes and you have a check that comes in, we began to use the date stamp, and that's totally allowable. We use the date stamp that's on the letter. So if it's date stamped December 31st, then we can also we can put that donation in that year, in that calendar year that we just ended. You might want to check with your offices and things like that, but I looked at that. The only issue would be credit cards. So people would need to know, if you're going to be using a credit card, you need to get it in before the end of the year, before December 31st. And that becomes not the nonprofit's problem to solve. It becomes that becomes between the donor and IRS when they file their taxes. So if you charge something, after midnight, New Year's Eve, and it hit January 1st, that's between you and your accountant and IRS. You're the one that's got to show those donations and what year that they were processed in. So, if you want your donation to count for 2020, you got to get it in before January 1st hit. Okay, that was just an extra little tip. But starting in October, we're going to be talking about acknowledgments, tax receipts, and thank you letters. And this is an area where I do find I do find a large issue with especially small nonprofits. And most of it comes from the different platforms that they're using that won't automate these type of letters. Sometimes it comes from if they went online and did it, and they automatically got a email. Well, that's fine as long as there's a tax language in it. So I'm going to be going over those things through the next for the month of October. And the next session next week is October 6th. It's Mind Your Manners, Boo. When to thank your donors. And I hope you'll join me for that. And, we'll go into talking about what's the difference between tax receipt and acknowledgement letters, what tax language to use on which one, which letter, which type of letter. We'll talk about tax receipt and receipted amount, things like that. So I hope you join me again next month, and hope you have a great evening, and I will talk to you next week.